All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today we are talking topic 8.5 decolonization after 1900. So, when you're talking about decolonization after 1900, it's important. Really, decolonization blasts into overdrive after World War II, but there are a few from before World War II that we're going to talk about. When you're talking about decolonization, you have to start with this: was it negotiation or was it armed struggle? So, some of the negotiations for independence was India from British colonial rule, Gold Coast, what would become Ghana, from Britain, territories of French West Africa, those are negotiated, okay? Then you've got armed conflicts for independence: the Algerian War for Independence from France, the Angolan War for Independence, the First Indochina War, which was Vietnamese independence from France. And then you had Egyptian conflict over British occupation of the Suez Canal. So let's start with India and a guy named Mohandas Gandhi, whose name you probably know. He was part of the Quit India movement. The Indian National Congress, under the leadership of Gandhi, led the Indian independence movement. In 1942, Gandhi initiates the Quit India movement and gives a speech that calls for nonviolent civil disobedience. His speech stirred Indian nationalists into action. Remember, with Gandhi, he is nonviolent. That's his big thing, or was his big thing. Then you've got the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Okay, the Muslim League was a political party established in 1906 with the goal of protecting the rights of Indian Muslims. The leader of the league, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, called for the creation of a separate state for Muslim Indians. Remember, going way back in India's history, you've got this blend of Hinduism and Islam. Sometimes it blends more than others. Sometimes you've got people who are more religiously tolerant within the Mughal Empire, and then you've got some who are more willing to say, no, we're Hindu, that's what we are. Or going back even further, that's always been a fight, and sometimes peaceful, sometimes not so peaceful, between Hindu and Islam. Now, their goals for independence: Gandhi and the Indian National Congress, they wanted Muslim and Hindu unity as one state. Jinnah and the Muslim League, remember, wanted a creation of a separate state for Muslim Indians. Indian independence in 1947. Here's some factors that led to India's independence: were increasing Indian nationalism, the Indian National Congress, and Gandhi's nonviolent push for independence. Remember things like the Salt March that Gandhi did, and these nonviolent protests. Also, World War II is going to kickstart independence, or not kickstart, but really put a lot of pressure on independence. So what you get is the creation of West Pakistan, East Pakistan, and then Kashmir, all in a partition that's going to lead to a ton of issues between the Pakistan and India. So now the British Gold Coast in Africa. This was a British colony from 1821 to 1957. After rapid economic development, strong nationalism developed here. Kwame Nkrumah forms the Convention People's Party in 1949 and calls for independence as quickly as possible. So the United Gold Coast Convention, led by Kwame Nkrumah, he and five other leaders of the UGCC, the United Gold Coast Convention, were arrested for allegedly starting the Accra riots. This event kickstarted the movement for independence in the Gold Coast. This was in 1948. Kwame Nkrumah, they gained huge support in 1949 with the Convention People's Party, the CPP. British officials propose a new constitution that will grant more self-governing rights for the Gold Coast. Nkrumah opposed the draft because he wanted full independence and launched the Positive Action Campaign. The campaign leads to riots, and Nkrumah is arrested in 1950. Now, the full road to independence. After the formation of the CPP under Kwame Nkrumah in 1949, it took 8 years of elections, riots, new constitutions, and a gradual peeling back of British colonial positions for Ghana to reach full independence on March 6, 1957. Now, the decolonization of French West Africa is going to happen slowly. And remember, this is a negotiation one. You get Guinea in October in 1958, Senegal, April 1960, Mali in June 1960, the Ivory Coast in August 1960, Niger, August 1960, Benin, August 1960, Burkina Faso, August 1960, and then Mauritania in November 1960. So with the Algerian War for Independence, obviously we're leaving behind negotiation now and getting into armed conflict. The Algerian War for Independence lasts from 1954 to 1962. Algeria was a French colony from 1834 to 1962. The Muslim population of Algeria was often subjected to discrimination from the French. Nationalist movements developed after World War II. The National Liberation Front, or FLN, launched a war against France in 1954. So that war will last again from 1954 to 1962. After years of bloody conflict that included guerrilla warfare, massacres, bombings, and assassinations, Charles de Gaulle began peace negotiations with the FLN in 1961. Algeria gains its independence on July 5th, 1962. Now, on to the Angolan, moving down south in Africa, the Angolan War for Independence. So, the groups which fought each other in the Angolan Civil War from 1975 to 2002 were previously united against the Portuguese in the Angolan War for Independence from 1961 to 1974. So you're seeing that a lot of times these groups, you saw it with China, you're seeing it with Angola. Groups that oppose each other will often unite to fight an outside oppressor, and then they have to basically turn toward each other and say, okay, only one of us is going to make it now. So with the Angolan War for Independence, you get uh, the Luta Armada de Libertación Nacional. And this is going to be UNITA versus FNLA. And remember, this turns into a little bit of a proxy war, too. The MPLA, which is the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola. And you're going to get the War of Independence. So the Carnation Revolution in 1974 in Portugal leads to a new Portuguese government that did not support colonial wars. This resulted in Portuguese support for an independent Angola, and negotiations led to Angola's independence. And the Angolan Civil War begins upon independence. So remember, just because a country is not a colony anymore does not mean that the legacy of colonization is not there. And a lot of those fights happen because now it's like, well, hey, we're not under the colonial thumb. We're going to have to figure this out now amongst ourselves. So French colonial rule in Vietnam. Vietnam, remember, is called French Indochina. It becomes a colony. The French attacked the port city of Da Nang in central Vietnam in September 1858 and renamed the city Touraine, which they then captured Saigon in 1859. So the larger French colony of French Indochina is established in the late 1800s and encompassed Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Small resistance movements occurred before World War II. So German troops are going to, obviously take over Paris in World War II. They're going to take over France in World War II. French colonial soldiers retreat during the Japanese coup in Vietnam in 1945. And then the Japanese create the Empire of Vietnam and install Bao Dai in their puppet government. So Ho Chi Minh, leader of the Viet Minh, resisted the Japanese until they withdrew from Vietnam in 1945 at the end of World War II. The Viet Minh agreed to the return of the French, and the French promised independence. These post-World War II negotiations quickly broke down, and in 1946, the Viet Minh and French began fighting in the First Indochina War. So Ho Chi Minh has been fighting people for a long time, a lot of different people too. Ho Chi Minh led the Communist Viet Minh against the French Viet Minh. I'm sorry. Ho Chi Minh led the Communist Viet Minh against the French, and the Viet Minh had the support of the Soviet Union and Communist China. The U.S. supported France in this war, obviously. France was defeated in May of 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And you see a picture. You see the picture of French soldiers being led to a prisoner of war camp at the end of the French Indochina War. In the Geneva Conference, negotiations begin while the Battle of Dien Bien Phu is happening. Vietnam was divided at the 17th parallel. The Geneva Accords set elections to occur in 1956 for a unified Vietnam. The Vietnam War, really between France and Vietnam, begins in 1954. Then you've got Gamal Abdel Nasser and the Suez Crisis. So Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal in Egypt, and that was operated by British and French investors. Israel, Britain, and France invaded Egypt, but Nasser prevailed. This event, known as the Suez Crisis, marked a failure for Britain and France, and it strengthened Nasser. Now, Quebec and the Quiet Revolution. Quebec is the largest province in Canada, which identifies heavily with the French. The Quiet Revolution was a time of rapid social, economic, and political change in the 1960s and 1970s, which led to greater nationalism in Quebec. And Quebecois separatist movements have not been successful, though, at establishing an independent nation from Canada, but there is always that tension there because Quebec speaks French while the rest of Canada speaks English. because of the Quebecois French background. All right, so this has been all of your 8.5 decolonization after 1900. Please let me know if you have any questions.